Hello, good morning, everybody, and welcome. I would like to extend a special welcome to those of you visiting our community for this event. As we like to say, welcome to paradise. My name is Therese, and it is my pleasure to introduce a longtime friend, Faraha Saba, as our guest speaker today. Faraha is currently a professor at Grossmont College. She has over 30 years of teaching experience in interpersonal communications. She's an author and the founder of SEECA, Soulful Educational Experience of Culture and Art. And her crew, Xavier and Brian, will be filming this event. Today, Faraha will be reading excerpt from her upcoming book, These Stories Saved My Life. And afterward, there'll be time for questions, comments, participation. Please welcome Faraha Saba.
Okay, is that mic on? There we are. Good morning. Good morning. Oh, thank you all so very much for coming out today and spending this morning with me. I see some friends and I'm going to meet some new friends. So I'm going to be reading from, as Therese mentioned, who's a longtime friend, from a collection of short stories that I have written entitled These Stories Saved My Life. There are 12 stories in the collection, and the story that I'm going to read today is entitled Chinaberry Playmates. So I'm going to read the story and then we'll have time to interchange and be with each other, okay?
Chinaberry Playmates by Faraha Saba. Prologue. Murders of Cheney, Goodman, and Schreiner. The murders of Cheney, Goodman, and Schreiner, also known as the Freedom Summer murders, the Mississippi Civil Rights Workers murders, or the Mississippi Burning murders, refers to events in which 3 activists were abducted and murdered in the city of Philadelphia, Mississippi in June 1964 during the Civil Rights Movement. The victims were James Cheney from Meridian, Mississippi, and Andrew Goodman and Michael Schreiner from New York City. All 3 men were associated with the Council of Federated Organizations, COFO, and its member organization, the Congress of Racial Equality, CORE. They had been working with the Freedom Summer campaign by attempting to register African Americans in Mississippi to vote. Since 1890 and through the turn of the century, Southern states had systematically disenfranchised most black voters by discrimination in voter registration and voting. The 3 men had traveled from Meridian to the community of Longdale to talk with congregation members at a black church that had been burned. The church had been a center of community organization. The trio was arrested following a traffic stop for speeding outside Philadelphia, Mississippi, escorted to the local jail, and held for a number of hours. As the 3 left town in their car, they were followed by law enforcement and others. Before leaving Neshoba County, their car was pulled over. The 3 were abducted, driven to another location, and shot dead at close range. The bodies of the 3 men were taken to an earthen dam where they were buried. On January 6, 2005, a Neshoba County grand jury indicted Edgar Ray Killen on 3 counts of murder. When the Mississippi Attorney General prosecuted the case, it was the first time the state had taken action against the perpetrators of the murders. Rita Bender, Michael Schreiner's widow, testified in the trial. On June 21, 2005, a jury convicted Killen on 3 counts of manslaughter. He was described as the man who planned and directed the killing of the civil rights workers. Killen, then 80 years old, was sentenced to 3 consecutive terms of 20 years in prison. His appeal, in which he claimed that no jury of his peers would have convicted him in 1964 based on the evidence presented, was rejected by the Supreme Court of Mississippi in 2007.
Chinaberry Playmates by Furaha Saba. In the summer of 1964, also known as Freedom Summer, 3 little girls who would be beneficiaries of the civil rights movement were being protected from the violent struggle by their parents and guardians. While the grown-ups knew a change was needed, they were keenly aware that their job was to protect the children so they would have a chance in life. The Chinaberry tree gracing the yard of Catronette and Augustina proper distinguished their yard from other play areas in the all-black Meridian, Mississippi neighborhood. The Chinaberry plant is native to China, Japan, the Indian subcontinent, southeastern Asia, and large parts of northern and eastern Australia. It is an ornamental tree with many uses. In our neighborhood, it was simply known as the shade tree. On rare occasions, as she was growing up, Topaz was allowed by her grandmother, Heather, to visit the proper girls who lived diagonally across the street from her to play. Grandmother Heather did not believe in allowing children to spend too much time at other people's houses. You don't know what might be going on, she often said. The only reason she consented to an occasional visit to the proper girls' home was because their grandmother, Mrs. Helena Proper, was a school teacher. It was presumed that nothing improper would be occurring at the proper home. Mrs. Helena Proper was a widow, a fair-skinned woman with dyed red hair. She was about 5 feet 5 inches tall and of average build. She wore round black eyeglasses and kept a pencil stuck in the hair bun she wore. Mrs. Proper was a county high school English and French teacher. She transferred the French accent to everyday Mississippi dialect. People in the community laughed at the way she sounded. Where in the world should get that funny talk? Folks would ask with quizzical facial expressions. Under their breath, someone would mumble with disdain, trying to talk like white folks. Mrs. Proper would be sitting at her own table and say to one of her children, "Pass the bread, please," as if she were in a French restaurant. The flat French accent she used would be scorned in Paris or New Orleans. Why don't she just say, "Pass the bread, please," like everybody else, folks wondered. Catronette and Augustina patterned themselves vocally after their grandmother. The whole Proper family indulged in what the local people call white folks talk. Mrs. Proper was a widow who was raising her son's 3 children, 2 girls and a boy. No mention was ever made of the children's mother. Mrs. Proper had converted the corner grocery store her husband left her into a home for herself and her grandchildren. The remodeled store was a cinder block building that the family used their worldly imagination to convert into a modest home. A shed that had once been a storage space for the former grocery store was now a playhouse for the girls and boys at separate times. Playing dolls and creating plays in that shed helped the girls extend beyond their physical boundaries. It was a private world. It was a place where they shut out the realities of racial conflict, class, and gender issues that oppressed the very air of Mississippi. In the shed, there was no discussion of adults' points of view. The shed was a place where the three girls nourished their imaginations. It was the 1960s. Girls and boys did not play in mixed company. If the girls were playing in the playhouse, their brother found someplace else to play with his friends. The brown and black siding that covered the exterior walls made the little building stand out in the impoverished neighborhood. In summer or winter, a gleaming tin roof absorbed the intense Mississippi heat or shuddering cold air. Catronette was the oldest of the proper girls. In 1964, she was 17. Topaz was 16, and Augustina was 14. While the search was on for the missing civil rights workers, they spent as much time as they could inside the shed. Catronette was the leader of the play group. She would dream up creative ventures for the group. The two younger girls would do everything they could to see the idea come into reality. Catronette was a shapely, fair-skinned girl with long, sandy brown hair. Catronette and Augustina modeled their grandmother. They spoke with the same Southern French accent that made them sound completely different from the black people in the neighborhood. Catronette, Augustina, and their brother would visit their father in New York City for a few weeks each summer. Topaz would be anxious for their return. She knew there would be new things to talk about and do. One summer, the proper girls went to a ballet. As soon as they had a chance to meet in the play shed, Catronette suggested, "Let's make up a ballet." Catronette and Augustina took turns explaining what a ballet was to Topaz. They talked and worked for several days to come up with a storyline to set to this new dance form into a ballet. Mind you, none of them had ever had a ballet class. Catronette took it upon herself to be the teacher. Augustina and Topaz imitated what Catronette said were ballet steps. In 1964, during the month of August, the girls spent time rehearsing and refining what would surely be considered unclassical by reputable ballet experts like Mr. Arthur Mitchell of the Dance Theater of Harlem. The girls were particular about how they would look. They carefully searched for clothes they could use as costumes. They cut and sewed until they had some semblance of what they wanted. They made Chinaberry necklaces and bracelets to match their pink, green, and yellow brightly colored dresses. Once the cardboard backdrops were painted, they were ready for their opening performance of Our Friend, the Chinaberry Tree. Mrs. Proper was the only audience member. The three girls proudly performed the ballet for her in the living room of the Proper home. The 12 cats, who were part of the Proper family, seemed to be paying attention also. Mrs. Proper watched with keen attention. The cats glared wide-eyed. Mrs. Proper generously applauded the awkward ballet. The whole Proper family indulged in what local people described as uppity ways. They were perceived as people who were trying to act white even though they were black. When people were described in this manner, they were usually fair-skinned with a soft texture of hair like the Proper family. All you have to do is look at the back of their neck and you will see that nappy hair they're trying to hide. People would sometimes huff. Most people in the community treated Mrs. Helena Proper with a whatever you say attitude. They went along with what she wanted, rarely challenging anything. Guitar Slim, a neighborhood character in his own right, was an exception to this code of behavior. Guitar Slim looked Mrs. Helena Proper straight in the eyes and told her, "You crazy lady." Sitting under the Chinaberry tree and watching the exchange between Mrs. Helena Proper and Guitar Slim was as stimulating as any planned recreation. Guitar Slim was an undersized, nutmeg brown-skinned man. Like many people in the neighborhood and many men in particular, he drank either whiskey or beer every day that God made. Professional people would probably label him an alcoholic. He never thought of himself in those terms. He was just doing what he needed to do to survive in an oppressed environment. Guitar Slim was an excellent yard man. Black and white customers sought his services. He had oral contracts in both communities. Whichever community he was working in, he behaved in the same manner. He would talk about the property owners. "I don't know why they got all these flowers around the grass. The grass is enough," he would complain in a loud, drunken mumble. Everyone knew when Guitar Slim was in the neighborhood. He would arrive in the heat of the day pushing a two-wheeled lawnmower. He always carried a guitar strapped across his back. He carried his harmonica in his shirt pocket over his heart. Whenever Guitar Slim got tired, he would sit down and play a tune to calm his nerves. He would make up songs like, "I'm a hard-working man. I ain't got nothing but the sun beating down on my head." When he finished playing the first song, he would take a sip of whiskey from the bottle he carried in his left hip pocket. Everyone put up with his drinking because it did not seem to affect his yard work. Guitar Slim made up original folk songs to address the issues he was facing. The verses he made up about Mrs. Helena Proper were startling. When he finished cutting the yard, Guitar Slim and Mrs. Helena Proper would argue over the price and precision. "Oh, that's too much, Mr. Slim," she would begin every time Guitar asked for the $5 for cutting the yard. After their standoff, Mrs. Proper would give in. "Here, Mr. Slim," she'd say, handing him the crumpled money. She did not agree with the price or care for his refusal to go beyond the requirements of the job. "I'm not gonna pick up your trash, lady. I'll mow around it. But you have to clean your own yard up. That's not in the job. You know what day I'm coming over here. You ought to clean up before I get here." He would slur back at her expected request. Mrs. Proper would stare, baffled by the exchange. She would shift her weight from side to side. Her fair skin would turn redder. She'd scratch her dyed red hair to show her confusion. When she handed over the money, she was giving in to the fact that she would never understand Guitar Slim. She was not trained to be a black street authority. More importantly, she could not understand why Guitar Slim would not obey as the children in her classroom or in her home. Mrs. Helena Proper was unaccustomed to having her authority challenged. Pushing the round, thick black eyeglasses she wore on her small, pointed nose, her body exuded a portrait of a school teacher confronting a behavioral pattern that was not described in the teacher's manual. Guitar Slim would really show his talent then. He would stand on the edge of the curb and start testifying with his guitar and harmonica about Mrs. Helena Proper. He played loud and sang loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear his complaint. Ain't nothing like a cheap black widow woman, he sang one day, accompanying himself on the guitar. She's just as bad as a poor white woman. They both want you to work, but they don't want to pay. He let his harmonica take over. You ain't gonna work me to death, lady, for a little bit of money, he belted. Guitar Slim was a street person. He did not know or care about Mrs. Proper's rules of behavior. He was concerned about the basics of food, clothing, shelter, a guitar string, and enough alcohol to have a fun outlook on the misery in his life. The girls would watch this exchange from underneath the shade tree. The Chinaberry tree gave a welcome breeze during the intensely hot summers. Usually, they would be playing inside the shed when they would hear the rising voices of Mrs. Proper and Guitar Slim. Knowing there was going to be a performance, the girls took their places underneath the Chinaberry tree. While they were listening to the adults exchange, they would collect Chinaberries. This was another one of their creative summer projects. After they gathered the Chinaberries, they would assemble them in groups of similar size. Little jewelry makers, they would string the berries together with a needle and white thread. We can sell them, Catronette convinced the girls. The young entrepreneurs got permission to peddle the natural jewelry to homes they were allowed to visit. They weren't allowed to go to everyone's home. They had very few sales and lots of fun. They made the necklaces all summer. The ones they didn't sell, which were many, they used as costume accents in the performances of poetry and plays that they presented for Mrs. Proper. These activities were a welcome relief from the fighting, abduction, and racial conflicts that surrounded them. If the girls managed to sell one Chinaberry necklace for 1 penny, it was like $1 million to them. They would report the sale to Mrs. Proper, who would reward the girls with enough nickels and dimes to buy a treat from the snowball man when he drove his truck through the neighborhood. Even though Topaz, Catronette, and Augustina lived in the same neighborhood, their lives were worlds apart. The fact that Mrs. Proper was a school teacher and the children's father an architect broadened the world for them. The Proper children had spent their early childhood in New York City. No one in Topaz's family had finished high school. Topaz knew the people of the proper family were people like everybody else, but she appreciated the fact that they had innovative ideas. Years later, Topaz would reminisce about the summer of 1964. She cherished her time with the proper family. And she also respected the fact that her mother allowed her to attend the Freedom School, where she first learned about the study of Black history. This school was different from the all-Black Catholic school her mother sacrificed for her to attend. At the Black Catholic school, Topaz studied classical subjects, reading, writing, arithmetic, with the German nuns. Topaz often thought about the fact that James Chaney, the Black murdered civil rights worker, was in her confirmation class. She had a picture to prove that fact. The picture was meaningful to Topaz because everyone on the photo was deceased except her. Topaz felt deeply about sharing her experiences of 1964. From her confirmation class, she was the only one who could speak for those who had crossed over. She wondered what life would have been like if James Chaney had not been robbed of his life. It was hard for Topaz to express how much the summer of 1964 had shaped her life. From the Freedom School, she learned the value of being civically engaged. This enhanced her Black Catholic education. At the same time, she was relieved to have the pleasures of the Chinaberry tree. 3 seeds of artistic expression were planted under the Chinaberry tree. Catronette, Augustina, and Topaz became lifelong practitioners and supporters of the arts. In the midst of intense racial oppression, I learned to play and create art. This seed was planted deep in my soul, and it continues to blossom today. I'm deeply, deeply grateful for the spoken and unspoken experiences. You're so kind. Thank you so much for your presence, for your attention, and I welcome any questions you have. Because if you don't have any questions, I have some questions for you.
I knew that.
Yes, Denise.
How old were they when they died? You know the age?
There's a mic right there.
Who's speaking?
Who's speaking?
Denise. Yes, thank you. I'm asking how old were they when they died?
Okay, let me point out in this picture here. Let me see, I think I can do this. Oh, can I? Yeah, I can move. Can I move, Xavier? This is James Chaney right here in this program. He was the Black civil rights worker who was murdered. And this is me.
Oh, Farah.
Chaney was 19. I think the other gentlemen were like maybe 20.
Really?
Yes. And of the 3 civil rights workers, Michael Schreiner, who was the oldest, he may have been 21. He had been in Meridian for most of the summer. He helped to organize the Freedom School that was held, because part of what happened for black people in Mississippi at this time was the fact that in order to vote, you had to pass a test. So most of the black people had been sharecroppers, or, so they couldn't read. And, many of them could not read or write. There were many educated people. There were some educated people, but most people could not read or write. So in order to pass a test for voting, they, they had to be taught how to read and how to understand the questions so they could pass them. So these guys, Michael Schreiner and his wife, Rita, Michael was about 20, and I think that she was probably the same age as he was. So they had been there for some time, and what distinguished them was the fact that they came into our community and they lived in the community with black people. And in Meridian, Mississippi at that time, black and white people just didn't integrate. You did not do that. So the other young man, Goodman, he had only been in Mississippi one day. He just arrived and went on this trip with these guys. James Chaney had been expelled from this school because he didn't want to follow the rules of the school, and then the German nuns, they didn't want to tolerate that, so they just put him out of school. And so he was available to drive and show the people show these 2 young white guys where they were going in this black community, which was really deep out into the country. So they were in there. James Chaney was 19. I think Michael was probably 20. I don't know about Andrew Goodman. He may have been not more than 20, I'm sure. He was a young college student. And the thing that was very, why this story was important to me, because during the whole summer, they were missing starting in June, when they didn't show back from going to visit this, church that had been bombed. So there, in this town, in Meridian, Mississippi, at that time, there was one television station, Channel 11. So when these guys went missing, all of a sudden the town was inundated with the media from around the world. And so there was a lot of information about the fact that they were missing. So there was a lot of fear and terror about the fact that they were missing, because we knew the Ku Klux Klan was alive, and we knew that any other child was subject to be abducted. We didn't know what had happened to them. It took about 6 weeks before their bodies were found. And so that's why this story is so important to me, because it demonstrates what, as children, we did to protect ourselves from the racial trauma that was in the very air we were breathing. So the fact that we were making Chinaberry necklaces and playing with dolls was not just an activity, it was a way of surviving and using our creative minds and imaginations to breathe beyond our immediate experiences.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is it too cynical?
Take a mic.
We had this person's first over
Hi.
there, and then you're next.
I'm wondering, the people, they all died but you, yes, and I'm wondering of the circumstances of their death. Were they all violent?
No,
Okay,
no, they just natural causes.
wow.
And they have died. I have outlived all of those people. And I like to share this picture because this is Howard Hill, this is Kenneth, there was Father Mathis, there's Elaine. I like to bring their spirits, present, and
It seems like they had short lives. I mean, in 1964, I was graduating high school.
Well,
You
they
know,
did. They had short lives, but remember, they live in Mississippi is the poorest state in the country.
It is.
You know, poor health care, poor diet,
How sad.
racism.
Was one of the points of this story to demonstrate racism within the black community?
Well, that it can be interpreted in the story, absolutely, because racism does exist in the black community. Because what would you do if you are surrounded by people who are racist toward you? So you don't really like them too much. It's kind of hard to discover the humanity. So and there's color prejudice within the black community, and there's economic, it's a lot of different. So racism does exist in all communities, is my contention.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Professor, could you please explain colorism for those that don't know that term?
Colorism.
Yes, please.
We have someone waiting here too.
Okay. Colorism is when people who are fair-skinned, when people who are dark-skinned are prejudiced against people who are fair-skinned. They discriminate people because they're fair-skinned. And it's based in the belief that, during slavery, the people who worked in the house, I'm going to use this word. I'm not going to encourage you to don't use this word, but I want to tell you what this was historically. So people that worked in the house were called house niggers, and they were usually fair-skinned because the white people who owned the properties didn't really want any dark people in the house. The people that worked out in the fields were called field niggers, and so that is the basis of colorism. And so it's discrimination because the people that worked in the field felt that the people that worked in the house had a better deal than they did, and the people that worked in the house felt like the people in the field are not as good as I am because I'm in the house. So that's the basis of people being prejudiced against other people because of the color of their skin within a race.
All right, we have someone right here.
Yeah, maybe this is really cynical, but I wonder if, judging from what I've read and everything that was going on with the blacks, still lynchings and stuff like that, if there'd been 3 black men, would it even been an item? Or the 2 white men that were there, it seemed to me that brought natural attention. And I wonder if the blacks were kind of upset about that the reason it was national attention is because there were 2 white men there.
Well, I think at that time, this was historical. It had never happened before, I wouldn't want to speculate about what would happen if, it was something else. I believe that everyone was shocked, period. And Michael Schreiner, we really, really appreciated him because he was teaching people to read and write that I know a lady, her name is Miss Polly Heidelberg, and she would say, Heidelberg, Heidelberg. She said, that's a hard name to learn how to spell when you done worked in the fields for 50 years. So there was a great appreciation for Michael Schreiner and for his wife Rita, because they were attempting to educate people that were, they had a very specific agenda. We want to teach you how to pass this test so you can vote, period, voting rights. So I think that the national attention, the media attention was there. If there had been 3 black men who were working on teaching people to vote, it would still have been a big deal because you have to understand that the black people did not have the right to vote. And that was, anybody that was talking about that was in danger.
Professor, could you please also explain the grandfather clause for anyone that is not familiar with that when talking about voting rights?
Well, this is a clause that says that, first of all, you have to be a property owner. If you were not a property owner, you could not vote. So if you were a sharecropper, you didn't have the right to vote. And the grandfather clause, if your grandfather didn't own some land, you weren't voting. Very, very simple. I don't know if that's a simplistic explanation, but does that answer your question? Okay. There's someone
Hello?
right there, right? Yeah? Oh.
Right here.
Oh, hi, Russ.
Hello. 2 questions ago about colorism.
Mm-hmm.
I just wondered if you would talk a little bit more about that, because even though there's the color difference, the light skin and the dark skin, also associated with that light skin is a certain amount of shame as well. I wonder if you could embark on that a little bit.
Well, yes. I have a friend, her name is, well, I'm gonna call her name. Is a friend of mine who was a very fair-skinned black woman. And she was very active in the civil rights movement. She was what we would call a black revolutionary. When she found out that her father was actually white, it was devastating to her because she had, been preaching this whole dynamic of black power and I'm black and I'm proud. And now I have this white blood. How am I going to manage that? So that's my best example of, that experience for someone, because it really affected her psychologically, like just her identity. Who am I? And how do I identify with the black people when I got this white blood? Direct.
It's just a minor issue, I guess, but what was that test like?
Oh, the Mississippi voting test?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. No, you needed a PhD. No, really, And the thing is that there were, it was different tests, too. So the white people didn't have to take the really hard test. That test was reserved for the people that couldn't read or write. And you had to know Mississippi history, which no one had bothered to really. It still hasn't been totally written. Yeah, carry it. Here it comes.
I have a question about being labeled black. At what degree, as an example, my granddaughter is biracial, white mother and a black father. However, when you do her DNA, the largest part of her is from her grandfather, Ashkenazi Jew. So, at what degree is somebody labeled black?
One drop.
Yeah, okay, that's what I thought, and I think that's so...
Well, it's very powerful.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
One drop. All right. I'm going to take one more question and then I have a surprise for you.
I have one back here.
Okay.
Also, if anyone's interested, I've pulled up a literacy test up on the screen. I don't know if any of you can see that, but it consists of riddles and questions that are near impossible to answer. You probably have to have a high degree of education to be able to answer these questions, and a lot of them did not have proper responses. I will try to make it as big as possible for you guys to be able to see.
Hi, my name is Dr. Leah Benamy. I'm new to San Diego and currently looking for work. I wanted to ask what advice you have for those of us who are navigating the diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging space for kind of during a complex time, looking forward to the future, but also trying to navigate its complexity. What would be some advice you would give to emerging leaders, current leaders, future leaders in this inclusion space? Thank you so much.
I'm sorry, doctor, thank you so much for your question. My first advice is, to make sure that one is connected with the leaders and the leadership in the Black community. Because without that connection, because there's a lot of prejudice in San Diego. Sorry to tell you all that in case you didn't know it. So, like trying to do independent efforts is a challenging thing. And so when there's prejudice in order to succeed in an area like diversity training and equity training and inclusion and things like that, there are certain segues into those communities. And so to know the Black people who are the movers and shakers in those areas would be my first advice. You have to go through those people to get to the other people. And I'd be happy to talk with you more in detail about it. Tell you some other stories. I'm happy to do that. And also I want to mention to you that the book, These Stories Saved My Life, is going to be being published. It will come out in April or May of 2024. So if you want to stay in touch with me, please, I think we have some forms in the back that ask for your name and your email address. Please fill those out, and I'll put you on our mailing list. And because we do other conversations, meaningful conversations online about race, because I believe that our ability to have these conversations is just one little thing that we can do as a community to address this issue of racism. Okay, so now those are all the questions I have for today. We're going to honor your time, but I want to. This is the gift I have for you. I have a little quick guided awareness I want to lead you through, because one thing that is important to do when you're engaging in this type of work is to be able to have the skill to turn within yourself, regardless as to what is going on in the exterior world. So if you'll sit back in your chairs comfortably for a few seconds, have your feet, supported on the floor, flat. And if you like, you can close your eyes, but it's not necessary. And so this is a guided awareness. It comes from the study of Swarupa Yoga. So take a nice, long, easy in-breath and let it out nice, long, and slow. And then turn your attention inward. And one of the best ways to turn your attention inward is to connect with your own body. So become aware of your toes, all 10 toes, and all the spaces in between. Extend your awareness from your toes into and through your feet, the bottoms and sides and tops of both feet, outside and inside. Extend your awareness from your toes and feet into and through your ankles. Become aware of your lower legs, your knees, your thighs, all the way down into your hips and hip joints. Extend your awareness into the space between your hips and hip joints, across the base of your pelvis, outside and inside. And from your pelvic area, extend your awareness into your abdominal area. Become aware of your whole belly, outside and inside. And from your abdominal area, extend your awareness into and through your chest. Become aware of your whole chest, all the way up through the fronts of your shoulders and across both collarbones. Hug yourself and wrap your awareness around the sides of your torso into your back. Become aware of the back of your shoulder blades, the space between your shoulder blades, the back of your ribs, the back of your waist, and through the whole lower portion of your back, including your hips and buttocks, and from the center of your waist, down through your sacrum into your tailbone, being aware of your whole back, your whole torso, outside and inside. Extend your awareness from your torso through your arms into your hands, and notice your fingers and thumbs and fingers. Become aware of your wrists, your lower arms, your elbows, your upper arms, through your underarms into your shoulders, your neck, your face, and your head. Your whole body is resting in this relaxation process. Take a nice, long, easy in-breath. The easy emptying. If you had your eyes closed, you can open them up. Stretch, move. I believe Treese has something to say.
Thank you so much, Faraha. I always love her presentations. I would love to acknowledge and thank Faraha's crew with Xavier, Brian, Liz, and Bev, our very own Eileen. We have a number of resident volunteers that have helped with so much. I have to acknowledge Sally, who coordinates all of these group events. For those of you who are visiting today, we have a wonderful restaurant downstairs. It is open to the public. The prices are reasonable, and you are more than welcome to check it out. So again, Faraha, thank you so much, and thank you all for joining us today.